In a world where the cracking of a whip against human skin was normal, and breathing without permission was considered a crime, a 12-year-old boy named Miles lived. A boy no one ever bothered to ask his name, because slaves had no names. They were simply meant to work, stay silent, and eventually die the same way they were born, in silence. But from childhood, Miles carried something inside him that others had long been stripped of. Eyes that refused to die out, eyes that still glowed even when the scorching plantation sun burned his skin and the air grew thick with dust and pain. Every day, among endless rows of cotton, where men and women worked with bent spines, and coughs and groans vanished into the wind, he would lift his head toward a tiny blue patch in a sky drowned in smoke and ash, and whisper to himself, "One day, I'll either be free or they won't let me live." His mother always said, "Your eyes are too bright, Miles. Grown men fear that kind of light." If this story has inspired you and you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. And how right she was. That night, when the cold wind slipped through the loose wooden planks of the slave cabin and the weary breathing of exhausted bodies echoed like a faint howl, Miles woke up thirsty, his bones aching from the long day's labor, and stepped outside to fetch water from the barrel beside the cabin. But the moment he heard slow, heavy steps in the darkness, he froze. Guided by the instinctive sense of danger he always carried, he moved quietly toward the stable and hid behind a wooden post. The weak lantern light revealed just enough of the plantation owners' and overseers' faces to recognize them. The owner spoke in a cold, lifeless voice. "That little boy, the one who looks around too much. I don't like the way he looks at things. Kids who think too much cause trouble." The overseer smirked and replied, "He's just a kid, sir." The man answered in a soft but terrifying tone, "All trouble begins with kids like that. Tomorrow night, when everyone's asleep, I'll take him to the river. I'll say he ran away." That sentence struck Miles like an axe to the heart. His breath stopped, his vision blurred, the world shrank and twisted around him. He had endured pain, hunger, exhaustion, even the whip itself. But now he faced something far deadlier, the realization that his death could be decided by a single effortless sentence from a man who didn't even know his name. He forced his trembling body to remain silent. Even the smallest rustle could end him. When the two men walked away and their shadows faded into the dark, Miles felt his legs shaking, yet something inside him had awakened. Not just fear, but a decision, a fire buried beneath years of humiliation. He returned to the cabin, no longer the same boy. Lying beside his mother, unable to sleep, he stared at the wooden ceiling. The cracks above him resembled pathways leading towards an unknown future. Under his breath, he whispered, "They want to get rid of me, but I'm not done yet." The image of the river, the cold lantern light, the ruthless face of the master, and the harsh voice of the overseer twisted together in his mind like pieces of a living nightmare. But then he heard his mother's voice echo in memory, trembling yet powerful. "Miles, freedom isn't given. Freedom has to be taken." That sentence cut through the darkness like a spark. For the first time, he wasn't just dreaming, he was choosing. He decided that before they killed him, he would do something no one expected from a 12-year-old. And in the stillness of that night, he whispered, "No, I won't die like the others." And in that exact moment, the first no was born inside him, small, quiet, but powerful enough to one day change the fate of an entire plantation.
The next morning, before the sun had even touched the edge of the horizon, the sharp whistle of the overseer cracked through the air like a bullet, jolting every slave awake. Miles rose with eyes burning from sleeplessness, but unlike every other day when he walked toward the fields hollow and silent, today he felt that every second of dawn was a second stolen from death. And while the other slaves filed out of the cabin like weary shadows, he whispered under his breath, "Today, I have to figure out what I'm supposed to do." As they reached the cotton rows, the weak morning sun hadn't yet warmed the earth, but the dampness clung to their skin. Women wiped their faces with torn scarves, and men with bent shoulders prepared for another endless day. The overseer, a man with harsh mustache and lifeless eyes, slung his whip over his shoulder as he circled above the workers like a vulture. Every flick of the whip's leather sent its sharp whistle across the field, forcing everyone to work faster. Miles, still shaken from what he had overheard the night before, tried to lose himself among the rows, but the faint tremor in his hands betrayed him. Samuel, a middle-aged man with a scarred face and eyes that carried both defeat and hope, worked beside him. With a quick sideways glance, he asked, "Boy, what happened? Your face looks like someone who's seen death." Miles couldn't tell the truth. He only murmured, "Just a bad dream." But the look in Samuel's eyes said he didn't believe it. He had tried to escape years ago. He knew what real fear looked like. Hours passed, and the sun grew merciless. Women's groans rose between the rows, and a boy even younger than Miles collapsed from the heat. Just like the day before, the overseer stormed over, kicked the child in the ribs with his heavy boot, and barked, "Get up! This ain't a place to sleep." The boy's mother rushed from between the rows, throwing herself over her child, begging, but the whip lashed across her back with such force that its crack echoed across the entire field. For a moment, everything fell into a terrifying silence. That scene burned itself into Miles's mind, and in that instant he realized he wasn't the only child whose bright eyes marked him for danger. Every child with a spark left in them was at risk. By noon, the heat beat down like a hammer. Sweat mixed with dust and cracked on their skin, but Miles's thoughts were elsewhere. His mind repeated one sentence over and over. "Tomorrow night, by the river, they'll say he ran off." Every time he recalled those words, nausea twisted his stomach, yet his fear slowly reshaped itself into something resembling anger. Anger at the idea of being erased like a silent animal. Later that afternoon, when the overseer left to check the barns, Miles slipped closer to Samuel and whispered, "Samuel, if someone knew they were going to be killed, what should they do?" Samuel paused, his hand stilling over the cotton, his gaze fixed on the ground as if years of pain rose at once to the surface. Then he said, "First, he has to decide to live. Most folks die in their minds before they're killed." Miles shivered. But what if he's just a child? Samuel turned and looked directly into his eyes that seemed to see far into a future Miles couldn't imagine, and said, "Sometimes a child can do what 100 men can't." The words struck Miles like a hammer, not from pain, but awakening. By sunset, the sky glowed red like spilled blood, and long shadows stretched over the fields. As the slaves walked back toward the cabins, the crunch of tired footsteps filled the path. But inside Miles, something new had begun to grow, a decision. He could no longer wait for someone else to write his fate. Now he had to find a way, not merely to avoid death, but to confront the very thing that had crushed him and everyone like him all his life. And in that quiet crimson dusk, Miles realized that survival might not be his only purpose. Perhaps one day he would have to stand.
Night had fallen over the plantation like a heavy hammer, and the silence hanging between the cabins was nothing but suffocating pressure for Miles. Everyone was asleep, yet he paced from corner to corner like a hunted animal, and every time he closed his eyes, the image of those two men beside the lantern and the deadly sentence, "Tomorrow night, by the river, I'll say he ran away," stabbed into his mind like a sharp blade. His mother slept deeply, her thin hands folded over her chest, each breath rising like a faint, weary sigh, but Miles didn't dare wake her, knowing this news would shatter her heart. So he slipped quietly out of the cabin, his bare feet trembling on the cold dirt, while his mind burned with chaos, as if two voices were fighting inside his chest. One, the frightened voice of a child saying, "Do nothing, just run," and the other, a deeper voice, like that same light his mother always spoke of, whispering, "Stand before it's too late." He made his way to the barn, where the shadows of the rotting beams stretched across the ground under the moonlight like the lines of a hidden map. He sat sat in the corner with his knees pulled to his chest and closed his eyes for a moment to think. But what he saw was neither his own future nor even the river. He saw the small bruised face of the boy the overseer had kicked earlier that morning. The helpless look in that child's eyes reflected back at him like a mirror. If Miles didn't stand up, whose turn would it be tomorrow? The question struck his heart like a spark. Just then, the sound of a soft rustle came from behind. Miles sprang up, but when he turned around, the face of Lauren, a 14-year-old girl with dark, sorrowful eyes, appeared in the dim moonlight. She whispered, "I figured you'd be here. Anyone can tell when someone's too scared to sleep." Miles said nothing at first, but Lauren stepped closer, sat beside him, and continued, "I heard you. Last night, your voice came from behind the barn. What did you hear, Miles?" His breath caught. He hesitated to speak, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in human for years: honesty. Softly, he said, "They're going to kill me." Lauren froze, but not out of fear, out of anger. Her narrow jaw tightened as she muttered, "Of course they will. Anyone who looks too much, asks too much, thinks too much, is a threat to them." A heavy silence fell until Lauren asked, "You're thinking of running, aren't you?" Miles whispered, "If I don't, they'll kill me." Lauren, with a calm but firm tone, said, "You can't do it alone." Instead of making him feel weak, the words cracked something open inside him, something like trust. She continued, "You've seen Samuel, right? He's not just some old slave. He almost escaped once. He knows the path." Suddenly, everything connected in Miles' mind. Why Samuel's words tasted of pain and experience. Why his gaze was deep and full of warnings. He was the one person who could help. But fear curled in Miles' stomach as he asked himself, what if others find out? What if they betray us? Lauren sighed and said, "Most people are scared, Miles, but some are just waiting for someone to strike the spark." And in that moment, in that heavy night smelling of damp dirt and silence, Miles felt, for the first time, that he wasn't just a 12-year-old boy. Maybe he really was the spark Lauren spoke of. When he returned to the cabin, he stopped before going inside and looked up at the star-filled sky. The stars glimmered like tiny points of hope scattered across the darkness. He whispered, "If I'm going to live, I have to be stronger than my fear." And right there, in a silence so deep even the wind couldn't break it, he made a decision that would change not just his fate, but the fate of many others. He had to find Samuel, not tomorrow, not next week, right now, before time ran out. Dawn had not yet opened its mouth, but the sky had already taken the color of lead, and the cold morning air scraped across Miles's skin like a dull knife. He had barely slept all night, and every time he closed his eyes, the image of the fate laid out for him, death in the darkness by the river, tightened around his neck like a cold rope. But unlike the night before, something inside him now felt hammered deep into the ground, a decision so solid that not even fear could shake it. When he stepped out of the cabin, the other slaves moved slowly and hollowly toward the fields, like shadows that had not yet accepted they were alive. But Miles's eyes searched for Samuel, the man whose gaze seemed to carry a lifetime of war, defeat, and hope tangled together, the one person who might be able to show him a way out. Samuel walked a little ahead of him, his spine bent, but his steps steady, as if something within him still lived that the world had failed to break. Miles hesitated for a moment, but then remembered time was like a fraying rope. Once it snapped, nothing of him would remain. So he quickened his pace and caught up. Softly, he said, "Samuel, I need to talk to you." Samuel didn't look at him, only replied, "Not here, boy." His voice was dry and firm, but a subtle tremble hid inside it, as though he too sensed something had changed in Miles. Until noon, they found no chance to speak. Whips cracking, the overseers barking orders, the weary groans of the workers filled the fields. The sun beat down like a merciless fire, and the calloused hands of the slaves disappeared into the cotton bushes. But Miles saw only one thing: Samuel's hands working with a heavy, ancient rhythm, as though each motion belonged to a story only he knew the ending to. Near dusk, when the shadows lengthened and the overseer stepped away for water, Samuel whispered, "Now." They slipped quietly out of the rows and sat behind the tool shed. Miles's heart pounded so hard he feared Samuel might hear it. Samuel said without preface, "Speak." And Miles, trying to steady his shaking voice, whispered, "They're going to kill me." A wild silence fell between them, but Samuel's eyes were not empty. Something like recognition flickered there. He said, "I knew they'd choose someone sooner or later." Miles asked in disbelief,
Why me? Look around. Samuel took a deep breath and said, "You see things you're not supposed to see. You ask too many questions. A child who doesn't stay quiet is a threat to them." The words echoed the same tremor Miles had felt in his chest the night before. "So what do I do?" he asked. Samuel lifted his eyes toward the fading light of the setting sun and answered, "Run." Miles's mouth went dry. Hearing that word from Samuel, spoken with such certainty, was like having a dark but real path suddenly open before him. "I can't do it alone," Miles murmured. Samuel replied in a calm but unshakable tone, "No one can do it alone." Another silence came, one made of decision, not fear. Samuel continued, "There's a way out, only one, harder than anything you can imagine. I tried it once. I almost made it." Miles stared with wide eyes. "Then why did you come back?" Samuel gave a smile that looked more like a wound than joy and whispered, "Because one of us betrayed me." That word, betrayal, fell into Miles's stomach like a cold stone. With a trembling voice, he asked, "How do I know someone won't betray us this time?" Samuel stepped close enough for Miles to feel the heavy, tired warmth of his breath and said, "You don't, but if you want to live, you take the risk." The sun cast its final weak light across the ground as Samuel added, "If you're truly ready, come behind the old barn tonight. That's where we start." When they returned to the others, Miles felt something inside him shifting. He no longer felt only fear. Something like anger and hope had begun to burn together. He knew that tonight, when darkness swallowed the plantation, he would take the first step, one that might lead him to freedom or to death. But now, the choice was made.
Night fell over the plantation with an eerie swiftness, as if the sky itself wanted to detach from the cruelty taking place beneath it. The cold wind slipped through the cabins, rattling the rotten boards with every gust, but to Miles those vibrations felt like warnings whispering, "Your time is running out." He stood beside his cabin, fists clenched and heart pounding. His eyes kept drifting toward the old barn where Samuel told him to come, but his legs felt like stone, not because he feared running, but because of the weight of what he was leaving behind, his mother. She sat inside, hunched forward, her thin shoulders swallowed beneath a worn blanket, and each cough sounded as if her soul was tearing apart. Miles stepped in silently, sat beside her, and for a moment wondered if he should stay. Maybe escape and freedom were meant for people with nothing left in the world, but he had his mother, and he couldn't imagine leaving her alone. But just as hesitation crept into him, she whispered, "Miles, why is your heart beating so fast?" As if mothers, even exhausted and half asleep, could sense the rhythm of their child's fear. He bit his lip and said nothing, but she placed her cold, fragile hand over his and continued, "You are like your father. When he decided something, I could see it in his eyes." Miles froze. "My father?" She gave a tired smile. Freedom was in his blood too, but his courage cost him dearly. A bitter silence hung between them. Miles realized she knew he wouldn't stay tonight. Without looking at him, she said, "If you're going, remember one thing. When the darkness feels too heavy, it means the light is close." Her words settled over his heart like a quiet prayer. He kissed her forehead for the last time, and with a pain twisting inside his chest, stepped out of the cabin. The night didn't welcome him, but he no longer needed its welcome. He walked into the darkness toward the old barn. Every step made a faint rustle on the damp dirt, and every small sound made him pause and listen, but no one was following him, yet. When he reached the barn, Samuel's shadow emerged from a corner like a piece of the night itself. "Thought you weren't coming," Samuel said. Miles exhaled shakily and whispered, "I thought maybe I couldn't." Samuel replied, "Everyone thinks that before the first step." Then he stood, grabbed a small sack from behind him, and handed it to Miles. "What's inside?" Miles asked. "Dried meat, a bottle of water, and a piece of charcoal, so you can mark the path if you get lost." Miles blinked. "Which way are we going?" Samuel traced the pale moonlight with his eyes and said, "Toward the swamps." Miles froze. Everyone knew the swamps were like an open mouth waiting to swallow the inexperienced. "What if we fall in?" he whispered. Samuel answered softly, "Don't think about what might kill you. Think about what might save you."
The words sparked warmth in Miles' chest. They stepped out of the barn and into the darkness. The plantation slowly faded behind them as silence swallowed everything. The ground softened, and the smell of moisture and decay thickened in the air. Twisted trees cast frightening shadows across the path. "What about Lauren?" Miles finally asked. "Does she know?" Samuel gave his first small smile of the night. "She's braver than all of us, but escape isn't meant for everyone. This path, it takes one of us and returns one." Miles swallowed hard, understanding exactly what he meant. Suddenly, a harsh wind tore through the brush, shaking the bushes, and a distant shout echoed through the night, coming from the direction of the cabins. Samuel didn't hesitate. "We move now." And in that moment, Miles understood there was no turning back anymore.
A strong wind blowing from the forest swallowed the sound of Miles and Samuel's footsteps in the darkness. Yet the trembling ground beneath them revealed that their pursuers were not far behind. Miles glanced over his shoulder every few steps, but Samuel, without looking back even once, walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, as if he understood the darkness better than any light. And that steady confidence was the only thing forcing Miles to focus on his breathing instead of his terror. Every time a branch snapped beneath their feet, or an owl cried in the distance, Miles' heart twisted violently in his chest. A few steps ahead, the ground suddenly grew softer, and a sharp smell of dampness and swamp filled the air. Miles slowed his pace and whispered, "Is this the swamp?" Samuel replied in a low but firm voice, "This is just the edge. The real part is ahead. If you place your feet wrong, you'll sink in an instant." Miles instinctively pulled his steps closer together, though the ground beneath him still shook like a sponge. They continued forward until the faint moonlight fell across a dark, trembling surface, muddy water that from afar looked like solid ground, but up close resembled an open mouth waiting to swallow anything. Samuel said, "Here, the only way across this swamp is a narrow path. Step off it, and it's over." Miles asked, "How do we find it?" Samuel traced a line in the semi-wet soil with the tip of his boot and said, "I remember. Years ago, when I tried to escape, I crossed right here. But—" He paused. His eyes carried the heaviness of a memory soaked in pain. Miles asked quietly, "But what?" Samuel replied, "But one of us, someone who was terrified, stepped off the path. Just one step, and that one step was enough." The sound of something sinking into the mud shattered the heavy silence of the night. Samuel continued, "You, look at me and put your feet exactly where I put mine. Only that." Miles nodded, the dim moonlight reflected in his trembling eyes, but his gaze now carried something between fear and resolve. They entered the narrow path. Samuel's steps were slow, measured, and deep, while Miles was forced to lighten his weight so the ground wouldn't swallow him. Every time the mud rose with a muffled sound, Miles felt something pulling his legs downward. But Samuel's calm voice strengthened him again. "Don't be afraid. As long as you follow me, you won't sink." Halfway through, a sudden shout burst behind them, a shout not born of fear, but of command. "There, find them." Torchlight scattered between the trees, and the stretched shadows of the pursuers danced across the branches. Miles froze, but Samuel hissed, "If you stop, it's over." Miles forced himself to move again, though the sound of something sinking into the mud behind them grew closer. Samuel threw a quick glance back and muttered, "One of them, he's too heavy, the swamp will pull him under." And right then, the horrifying scream of a man being swallowed by the mud echoed through the swamp, a scream that was abruptly cut off, as if the swamp had sealed its mouth over him. But the horror bought them only seconds of peace. The other pursuers moved more cautiously now, but with even greater fury. Gasping, Miles cried, "Samuel, we can't outrun them." Samuel answered in a short, dry tone, "We're not trying to outrun them, we're trying to survive." When they finally stepped off the swamp path, firm ground appeared beneath their feet. Miles almost collapsed onto the dirt, but Samuel grabbed him and said, "No, not now, it's not over yet." From behind the trees, torchlight crept closer, and the sound of dogs that had finally picked up their scent echoed through the dark. Samuel said, "They think we're still in the swamp. We have to head into the northern forest. It's the only way we can lose the dogs." Miles' legs trembled as he asked, "Samuel, what if they catch us?" Samuel stared into his eyes, a deep, heavy gaze. Then, "You run faster than me." Miles whispered in disbelief, "But what about you?" Samuel gave a faint smile, more sorrow than joy, and said, "I already had my chance. This time, it's yours." The sentence cut like a knife, painful, meaningful, but before Miles could respond, the vicious barking of the dogs erupted behind them, and Samuel shouted, "Run!" And so began a sprint not just for escape, but for life itself. The night had swallowed the forest whole as Miles and Samuel ran, their breaths sharp and burning in their chests, the dogs' barks slicing through the darkness like knives. Branches lashed against Miles's arms and legs, but he didn't dare slow down, not when every heartbeat felt like a countdown, and every step the thin line between life and the chains waiting behind them, while Samuel, despite his age, moved with a steady, unbreakable rhythm, and Miles followed the cadence of those footsteps like a rope in a storm, though fear gnawed at him with every echo of the hounds drawing closer. The forest grew denser, trees closing around them like walls, and suddenly Samuel raised a hand for silence, forcing them to crouch behind a fallen log as Miles pressed a trembling hand over his mouth to muffle his gasps, the dogs barking wildly somewhere to the south, while guards splashed through swamp water, unaware their prey had reached firmer ground. And in that suffocating stillness, Samuel whispered, "This part's worse than the swamp. Fear makes people loud out here," just as a sudden rustle made Miles flinch before a deer burst through the darkness, fleeing the same danger, prompting Samuel to murmur, "Everything runs from them, but not everything escapes." And once the barking softened, he nudged Miles forward, saying, "Come, north, there's a stream ahead, it'll hide our scent," leading them through the trees until the faint trickle of water reached their ears, and hope flickered inside Miles, only to freeze when the moon revealed a figure standing in the stream, Lauren, soaked to the knees and breathless, staring at them wide-eyed, before hissing, "You really thought you were escaping without me? I've been following you for hours," which made Samuel scowl. "You don't know what you've stepped into." But Lauren stepped closer, water splashing around her legs as she said, "I know exactly what I'm doing. You need 3 people, not 2. And though Samuel seemed ready to argue, the dogs barked again, closer, prompting Lauren to say urgently, "I crossed upstream. They'll follow my trail first. That buys us time." And for the first time that night, hesitation flickered in Samuel's eyes before he exhaled and said, "Fine, but you follow every word I say. One mistake, and we all die." And Lauren nodded, while something warm sparked inside Miles, because suddenly he wasn't alone. They stepped into the water together, letting the cold current erase their tracks, while the forest watched in a breathless, eerie silence. And when Miles whispered, "Why'd you follow us, Lauren?" she didn't look at him as she answered, "Because someone had to make sure you make it. You became a kind of hope for the younger ones, even if you don't realize it." And her words struck him like an emotional blow, dangerous yet igniting something deeper inside him. After nearly an hour, Samuel halted, saying, "We can't stay near the stream. Cliffs ahead, the path narrows." And when Miles echoed, "Cliffs," Samuel nodded. A long drop, hug the left wall, one wrong step and it's over. And soon the moon exposed a vast black abyss with a narrow ledge clinging to the cliffside as wind howled upward, Lauren whispering, "Don't look down," while Samuel pressed his back to the rock and moved step by step, saying, one step, as pebbles crumbled beneath them and vanished soundlessly into the void. Miles forced his shaking body to follow Samuel's rhythm, while Lauren stayed dangerously close behind him, ready to grab him if he slipped. Then a shout tore through the trees, and torchlight flickered as Samuel growled, "Move!" And though they could not run, their steps quickened desperately along death's edge until a gunshot cracked through the night, sparks exploding from the stone inches from Miles's head, followed by another shot grazing his arm and sending hot blood streaking as his foot slipped off the ledge, Lauren grabbing his shirt and yanking him back as she shouted, "Don't look down," as hunters roared triumphantly behind them. Yet the 3 pressed forward with burning lungs and trembling limbs until finally Samuel leapt onto solid ground and pulled Miles and Lauren after him, shouting, "Run!" as they fled into the darkest, deepest part of the forest, where even the moon refused to follow.
The wind tore through the branches like an angry creature, striking Miles's face with a cold sting as if warning him he was nowhere near safe. He, Samuel, and Lauren, after their frantic escape along the cliff, were now deep inside a forest so dark even the moon refused to touch the ground. Their only visible trace the faint white mist of their breath fading into the freezing night. But none of them could stop because the distant barking of dogs and the shouts of the guards chased them like a relentless shadow. Miles's legs burned, the wound on his arm throbbed violently, and the dried mud on his clothes felt like stone. But every time he slowed, Samuel's voice echoed in his head. "As long as you keep moving, you're alive." When the dog's barking finally softened, Samuel raised his hand, and the three of them took shelter behind the massive trunk of an ancient tree. Miles's heart slammed so hard he was sure it could be heard miles away, while Lauren pushed her sweat-soaked hair from her face with trembling fingers and panted, "If we keep running like this, we'll die before they even catch us." Samuel replied quietly, "We don't run anymore. From here on, if you want to live, you think, don't just flee." Then he pointed between the trees, where faint specks of light flickered deep in the darkness, like weak, watching eyes. Miles whispered with a dry throat, "What is that?" Samuel's eyes glinted as he answered, "If my memory's right, beyond that lies a ravine, and past it a cabin, a place I hid once long ago." Lauren's voice tightened. "And if it's theirs? If the guards have taken it?" Samuel said calmly, "Nobody's foolish enough to live out here unless they're running from something bigger than death." The meaning struck Miles like a soft blade. People like them, people with nowhere left to go. They moved in silence, not running, not crawling, something between both, light but urgent steps over wet leaves and broken branches. Every rustle, every shift of the wind made Miles flinch, but something new had awakened inside him, something stronger than fear, responsibility, not for himself alone, but for every child back in that plantation whose eyes had once held the same faint spark his did. When they reached the edge of the ravine, the ground sloped downward. Samuel warned, "Careful, slip here and your bones will break before the guards even find you." Lauren muttered, "Perfect. Out of every path in the world, why is ours always the worst?" Yet even her complaint held a bitter humor, the kind people use when crying would be easier. They descended slowly. Several times Miles slipped and nearly fell, but Lauren's hand or Samuel's steady grip always pulled him back. At the bottom, the lights became clearer, small lanterns glowing from the windows of a wooden cabin, a fragile heart pulsing in the dark. Miles held his breath. "Do you think it's safe?" Samuel replied, "If the same people still live there, it's the safest place in this world for you." Lauren asked softly, "And if it isn't them?" Samuel answered without hesitation, "Then we have one chance. Shoot before they do, or disappear before they open the door." Miles felt hope collapse inside him. Never had he been so close to something that looked like safety, yet felt so dangerous. Then the dogs barked again, faint but steady, like a slow-moving tide approaching. Samuel whispered, "We've got no time. It's now or never." The three ran toward the cabin, this time not with blind terror, but with the urgency of a chess player taking the final move before being checkmated. At the door, Samuel knocked 3 firm, rhythmic strikes, meaningless to Miles, but meaningful to Samuel. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then came the scrape of something heavy being dragged, followed by the click of a metal lock. Miles instinctively stepped back. Lauren froze, breath caught in her throat. The wooden door creaked open, a thin band of warm light spilling across their dirt-caked faces. A black old man with tangled white beard and weary but alert eyes appeared, a rusted shotgun pointed directly at them. His voice was harsh but wise. "Whose name is written on this door that they bring death to my doorstep in the middle of the night?" Samuel stepped forward, raising his hands. "If you still remember me, I'm the one who walked out of here alive once, only to return and pull another through." The old man stared at him intensely. A flicker of doubt and recognition moved across his eyes. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. Only the very foolish or the very brave come back to hell after escaping it once. His gaze shifted to Miles and Lauren, lingering on Miles's bleeding arm and Lauren's trembling hands. Finally, he sighed and opened the door wider. "Well, you 3 look like the kind who ain't figured out which one you are yet. Get inside before this forest decides to swallow you whole." The words hit Miles like a doorway opening inside his chest. He stepped into the cabin, into the first real hint of shelter he'd ever known, unaware of the price he would soon have to pay to stay alive.
The cabin smelled of wet wood and old earth, and when Miles stepped inside, the faint warmth of the dying fire brushed his cold skin, yet nothing could steady the tremor in his chest, because the old man's eyes, those weary gray eyes, looked less like a savior and more like a hunter unsure whether to help them or destroy them. He shut the door hard, slid 3 locks into place, and said, "If you brought trouble with you, just know I owe nothing to anyone." Samuel stepped forward calmly. "We're not here for debts, just shelter for one night." The old man scoffed, slammed his cane to the floor, and muttered, "Shelter? This place is nothing but pain and memory." Lauren whispered under her breath, "Well, that's a warm welcome." But the old man ignored her and pointed to 3 rusted metal cups. "Sit, before the dogs catch your scent." Miles sat, but his eyes never left the man's face. In the flickering firelight, the lines across his features looked like scars that had survived years, scars born not only from suffering, but from guilt. Samuel asked, "You still live alone, Elias?" The old man answered sharply, "Yeah, after the last time I let people in, I learned solitude's safer." A chill ran through Miles. "Last time? What happened?" Elias stared into the burning wood, smoke swirling upward, and with a voice rising from somewhere deep and broken, said, "A boy like you, with bright eyes, and a girl, too, about her age." He nodded faintly toward Lauren. Lauren frowned. "And then?" Elias whispered. "And then I helped them, or thought I did, but they never came back." Samuel's voice tightened, low but firm. "Elias, you told me that path was safe." A bitter laugh escaped the old man. "It was, until I learned how wrong I'd been." Miles felt something tightening under his skin. Wrong? For the first time, Elias looked straight into his eyes, so sharply, so heavily, that Miles instinctively leaned back. "Yeah, wrong, because I thought a man like me could be a rescuer. I wasn't a runaway slave boy. I was a slave catcher." Lauren gasped, Samuel froze, and Miles felt the world tilt beneath him. The man sitting before them, their only hope, had once hunted people like them for coin. Elias continued, "For years, I handed folks like you over for a handful of silver, a warm meal, some safety. I told myself I had no choice, until the day I turned in those 2 kids." His voice cracked. He stared into the fire. "Their faces still wake me up at night. When I learned what happened to them afterward, I wished it had been me instead." Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Samuel asked quietly, "So why'd you come back here?" Elias's face sagged, broken under years of regret. "Because I hoped someday someone would come along and I'd get the chance to balance even a sliver of what I did. But the world doesn't give second chances, not until you 3 walked out of the dark." Miles didn't know whether to trust him or fear him. The man was both refuge and threat. Lauren asked sharply, "So, are you helping us now, or are we ending up like those 2 kids?" Elias sighed. "If I wanted to turn you in, the dogs would have smashed this door already. But helping you, that's not simple. The path you want, last time I sent people there, 3 of them died." Samuel stepped closer. "But you're still the only one who knows the way." Elias lowered his head. "I know, but the route's changed. More dead, more traps, and now only one path remains." Miles whispered, "That path, where is it?" Elias answered slowly, "North, through the black ridges, a place only someone willing to leave part of themselves behind can survive." Lauren murmured, "What does that even mean?" Elias said, "It means that trail tests more than your body. It breaks your soul." Then he looked at Miles, really looked at him. Your eyes remind me of that boy, and I fear history might repeat itself." Miles, caught between fear, anger, and hope, whispered, "History only repeats when no one stands in its way." For the first time, Elias almost smiled, a small, sad, honest smile. "Then maybe it's time I make the right choice for once." But right as he said it, the sound of snapping branches echoed behind the cabin. The dogs had arrived. Night hung over the cabin like a thick curtain, and the heavy breaths of the hounds echoed through the wooden walls. Yet for the first time since the escape began, Miles felt his fear shrinking, no longer a monster, just a shadow before a choice he had to make. Elias swiftly extinguished the lantern, pulled down the heavy window cover, and said in a calm but firm voice, "This isn't the time to hide anymore. It's the time to cross." Samuel whispered, "They're too close." Elias smirked faintly. If they weren't close, the path wouldn't be worth it.
Then he opened the small trapdoor to the underground, revealing a narrow, dark passage, something that looked like it had waited years for this exact night. Lauren asked, "Where does this even go?" Elias replied, "Out of the forest, where no dogs, no rifles, no man alive can track you." But before they could descend, loud pounding shook the front door, heavy strikes, each one closer than the last. Samuel placed a hand on Miles's shoulder. "Son, you go first. This path starts with you." Heart beating like thunder, Miles stepped into the darkness. The earthen walls smelled of damp soil and old escapes. Lauren followed him, but before Samuel could enter, Elias grabbed his arm. "You stay behind. If they break through, we need seconds, just seconds." Samuel nodded, but Elias stopped him again. "No, you're going with them. My past stays here. Freedom belongs to those who still have a chance to build it." Samuel tried to object, but the top half of the door splintered violently. No time for arguments. Elias whispered with an eerie calm, "Go. This is the last thing I'm meant to do." And before any of them could protest, he shut the trapdoor, slid the wooden bar into place, and from behind the door shouted, "Run! The way is short! Freedom doesn't wait!" Miles didn't want to leave him, didn't want to abandon the man who had just chosen redemption over survival. But Samuel pulled him forward. Trust him. This is the choice he wanted, the one right choice. Then the cabin exploded into chaos, the brutal crash of the door giving way, the thunder of Elias's shotgun, angry shouts, bodies colliding, and then silence. Not the silence of defeat, Miles felt that instantly, but the silence of a sacrifice that opened a path. They ran through the narrow passage until it ended, and a slab of earth shifted aside. Cold night air rushed over their faces like a blessing. Before them stretched an open field, no lights from the plantation, no shadows of hunters, just a horizon slowly turning from black to blue. Lauren whispered, "So this is what freedom looks like?" Samuel drew a long, trembling breath. "Yeah, this is the beginning." But Miles stepped forward, as if needing proof the moment was real. When the first rays of sunlight touched his wounded skin, something inside him cracked, not from pain, from release. Tears fell silently as he whispered, We're really free?" Samuel rested a hand on his shoulder. "You're free, Miles, because you stood your ground, because you didn't let fear decide, because you chose." Lauren smiled, warm, bright, enough to wash away every dark night behind them. "This is just the start. We didn't just escape hell, we outlived it." The three of them stood side by side as the rising sun painted the sky gold. Behind them, the past closed. No return, no chains, no shadows. Miles inhaled deeply, letting the air of a new world fill his chest. This is the day I always dreamed of." And as they stepped into their new path, birdsong rose across the fields like a hymn of freedom, one no chain could silence ever again. And that is how the boy whose eyes were once too bright became the one who defeated the darkness and walked into the light. Thank you for watching until the end of this video. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts with us in the comments below.